They chased him for years, sent their best pilots, and still couldn't kill America's top ace. At the exact moment everyone believed he was untouchable, the war flipped into a brutal paradox. The enemy failed, but his own side did not. In just a few seconds, friendly fire finished what years of combat never could. If this story feels impossible, stay with us. What happened next changed everything. By the summer of 1944, there were pilots the enemy feared, and then there was him. German controllers had watched his call sign move across radar screens for months. They had vectored interceptors, sprung traps, and thrown entire formations at him. Nothing worked. Time after time, he came back. Other pilots didn't count his missions anymore. They counted how many times he should have been dead. He was not reckless. He was not lucky. He was precise. Years in the air had carved instincts into him that no training manual could teach. He read the sky faster than others read instruments. He sensed danger before it formed. Enemy pilots learned this the hard way. If they hesitated, they died. If they pressed too hard, they died faster. This was what made him different. He didn't wait for mistakes. He created them. By now, his reputation had escaped squadron walls. Mechanics talked about him like a force of nature. Wingmen flew tighter when he led. Enemy pilots who survived encounters described the same thing in different words. The feeling that the fight was already over before it began. Statistically, pilots like him didn't die easily. The numbers were clear. Most fighter pilots were lost early in their combat tours. Survival rates dropped fast after the first dozen missions. Anyone still flying after years of combat usually wasn't alive by accident. He had crossed that threshold long ago. Enemy fighters had tried everything: head-on attacks, high-speed dives, ambushes from the sun, coordinated group tactics. He survived them all, not because he avoided danger, but because he understood it better than the men trying to kill him. By this point in the war, his confidence wasn't arrogance, it was evidence-based. Every mission reinforced the same belief. If death came, it would come from the enemy. That was how war worked. That was the unspoken rule everyone accepted. You faced danger out there, beyond friendly lines, where silhouettes were hostile and tracers meant intent. Inside those lines, you were safe. At least, that's what everyone believed. The war itself was changing faster than anyone could track. The front lines were no longer clean edges on a map. They twisted, collapsed, and reformed overnight. Enemy troops wore stolen uniforms. Radios failed. Weather erased visibility. Fear compressed decision-making down to seconds. And systems designed for order were being forced to operate inside chaos. None of this showed in the cockpit. From the air, the world still followed familiar rules. Altitude mattered, speed mattered, discipline mattered. He had mastered all of it. He had beaten the enemy long enough that survival felt almost routine. That belief settled in quietly, not as bravado, but as certainty. If something went wrong, it would happen in combat. If he died, it would be over enemy territory. If the enemy finally caught him, it would be because they earned it. What he couldn't see yet was the flaw in that belief. The greatest threat to him was no longer the enemy hunting from above. It was the system waiting below. A system built for speed, fear, and split-second judgment. A system that didn't recognize legends. A system that had no room for context, reputation, or years of survival. And when the moment came, it wouldn't hesitate. By this stage of the war, the enemy knew exactly who he was. They had seen his aircraft return with empty ammunition counters. They had listened to pilots describe engagements that ended in seconds, not minutes. Some of those pilots never came back. Others did, carrying the same warning. If you saw him first, you might live. If you didn't, you wouldn't. The enemy adapted. They always did. They began avoiding single attacks and waiting for numbers. They tried drawing him low, dragging him into vertical fights, forcing him to bleed speed and energy. They baited him with damaged aircraft, hoping aggression would turn into overcommitment. It never worked. He didn't fight like most pilots. He fought like someone who understood timing better than everyone else in the sky. He attacked when it broke formations apart. He disengaged before fights became even. And when the moment came, he struck with precision that left no time for recovery. Enemy pilots didn't just lose aircraft, they lost confidence. Years of combat should have worn him down. Fatigue kills pilots quietly. Reaction time slow. Judgment slips. That's how aces usually die, not in dramatic duels, but through small errors that finally add up. That pattern never appeared. Instead, the longer he survived, the sharper he became. Experience didn't dull him, it refined him. Each encounter added another layer of understanding, another edge. From the outside, it looked impossible. Statistically, pilots with his number of missions should not exist. Survival curves didn't bend that far. Even the best were eventually caught by bad weather, mechanical failure, or a single unseen attacker. Yet mission after mission, he returned. The belief hardened across his unit. Some pilots whispered it, others joked about it, but everyone felt it. If he was in the air, the odds shifted. Escorts tightened up. Bombers flew with more confidence. Enemy attacks hesitated just long enough to fail. The war was teaching everyone a lesson. Skill could overcome numbers. Experience could overcome chaos. And some men were simply better at surviving war than others. That belief spread upward as well. Commanders trusted him with the most dangerous assignments. Not because he was expendable, but because he was reliable. When missions went wrong, he was the one expected to hold the line. And he did. Every successful return reinforced the same conclusion. The enemy had tried everything. They had years, they had numbers, they had opportunity. They still couldn't kill him. By now, the danger felt distant, abstract, something that happened to other pilots on other days. Combat was still violent, still unforgiving, but it followed rules he understood completely. The enemy was predictable, fear-driven, desperate. Friendly territory was not. What no one realized yet was that the war had quietly shifted the nature of danger. The enemy was no longer the most unstable element in the system. The battlefield itself had become fragmented, lines blurred, information lagged, identification became guesswork under pressure. The enemy failed because they played by combat rules. The next threat would not. It wouldn't announce itself. It wouldn't maneuver. It wouldn't give him time to react. And when it came, it would come from the one place no pilot ever watched closely enough. Below. By late 1944, the war no longer looked like the war he had mastered. Front lines stopped behaving like lines. They bent, snapped, and overlapped. Enemy units slipped through gaps wearing stolen uniforms. Vehicles changed hands. Radios went silent at the worst moments. Orders arrived late, or not at all. Fear filled in the blanks. Ground forces lived inside constant uncertainty. Every sound could mean infiltration. Every aircraft approaching low could be hostile. The margin for hesitation collapsed to almost nothing. Air defense units were given one priority above all others: react fast. The logic was brutal, but simple. A delay of seconds could mean dead troops, burning convoys, shattered supply lines. Anti-aircraft crews were trained to make decisions without context, without history, without time. Friend or foe had to be decided instantly. From the cockpit, none of this was visible. Pilots still thought in terms of altitude, speed, and airspace. They trusted procedures that had worked for years: recognition signals, radio calls, familiar flight paths. The invisible contract between air and ground remained unspoken but assumed. Inside friendly lines, you were protected. What no one acknowledged openly was that this assumption depended on perfect conditions: clear communication, calm decision-making, time to identify silhouettes and intent. None of those conditions existed anymore. Forward airfields were carved into unstable territory. Supply routes were under constant attack. Anti-aircraft crews slept in short shifts. weapons always manned, fingers resting near triggers, even when nothing moved. They were not hunting aces. They were trying to survive the next 5 minutes. Every training manual assumed ideal visibility and disciplined execution. War had erased both. Cold weather jammed mechanisms. Radios failed. Recognition signals went unseen or misunderstood. Mistakes became inevitable. The system did not collapse all at once. It degraded quietly. One shortcut here, one assumption there. Each made sense in isolation. Together, they formed something dangerous. A system optimized for speed over certainty. From the air, he remained unaware of how fragile the ground had become. His focus stayed forward, outward, toward the enemy. That was where danger had always lived. He still believed the same rules applied. That belief had kept him alive for years, but now it was outdated. The most lethal threat no longer required maneuvering skill or tactical brilliance. It didn't need to outfly him or outthink him. It only needed to misidentify him, and it would not hesitate once it did. Somewhere below, weapons crews waited under standing orders that left no room for legends, no space for reputation, and no allowance for error. They did not know his name. They did not know his record. They did not know how long he had survived. They only knew what they were trained to do when an aircraft appeared at the wrong altitude, from the wrong direction, at the wrong time. When that moment came, the decision would not feel dramatic. It would feel routine. And routine, in war, is often more dangerous than chaos. The mission itself did not feel different. It wasn't a desperate scramble or a last stand. It was the kind of task he had flown dozens of times before. Patrol an active sector, protect friendly forces below, intercept anything hostile that crossed the line. Routine work in an extraordinary war. The weather had finally cleared after days of low clouds and fog. Cold air sharpened visibility. The sky looked clean. From the cockpit, it felt like the kind of morning pilots trusted. Below him, the ground told a different story. Roads were clogged with damaged vehicles. Columns of supply trucks burned along frozen highways. Men moved cautiously, weapons always raised, expecting attack from any direction. German aircraft had been slipping through at low altitude, striking fast, vanishing behind hills and tree lines. Ground units were tense, exhausted, alert to the point of paranoia. When reports came in of enemy aircraft attacking friendly positions, there was no debate. Fighters were needed immediately. Delay meant casualties. He acknowledged the call and turned toward the contact. Ahead, low over the terrain, he saw it. A hostile aircraft working the ground, firing into friendly columns, using speed and altitude to escape retaliation. The situation was clear. The enemy was in range. Friendly lives were at risk. This was the kind of moment pilots trained for. He pushed his aircraft forward and began the pursuit. The enemy pilot reacted instantly, breaking away and hugging the landscape. The chase dropped lower, faster, closer to the ground than doctrine preferred, but still within reason. He had flown this profile before, many times. Each second compressed the decision space. The enemy aircraft stayed just ahead, weaving through terrain, drawing the pursuit closer to friendly lines. From above, the geometry was simple. Close the distance, force a mistake, end the threat. Below, anti-aircraft crews tracked the movement with rising urgency. 2 aircraft, low altitude, high speed, approaching from hostile direction. One was clearly enemy. The other was unknown. Silhouettes blurred at that speed. Profiles flattened against the ground. Radios crackled with incomplete information. Identification procedures existed on paper, but paper had no place here. The system demanded a decision. To the gunners below, the scene compressed into a single question: allow another attack, or stop both aircraft before they reached friendly positions. Hesitation meant risk. Action meant control. Standing orders favored action. In the cockpit, he never considered the possibility of danger from below. His attention was fixed forward, locked onto the enemy aircraft as it began to break away. He was seconds from ending the chase, seconds from neutralizing the threat, seconds from believing, one last time, that friendly lines meant safety. What followed did not unfold like a battle. There was no maneuvering, no warning, no exchange of skill. There was only speed, proximity, and a system designed to fire first. The decision on the ground was made faster than thought. And once made, it could not be taken back. The ground crews never saw a legend. They saw motion. Two aircraft tearing across the landscape at treetop height. One clearly hostile, one closing fast behind it, firing. At that speed, at that angle, silhouettes collapsed into shapes. There was no time to measure wings or count details. There was only trajectory. Training took over. Muscle memory replaced thought. The order was simple and had been drilled into them for months. Unidentified aircraft approaching from enemy direction were a threat. The decision took seconds. 4 guns spoke at once. A wall of tracer fire climbed into the air, cutting across the path of both aircraft. The enemy pilot reacted instantly, breaking away and diving hard into the terrain. He disappeared. The second aircraft did not. Rounds tore into the engine and cockpit. The impact was violent, immediate. Oil burst across the windscreen. Controls went slack. Power vanished in an instant. There was no fight left to win. Inside the cockpit, he reacted on instinct. Pull up, gain altitude, bail out. The sequence was automatic, the same drill every pilot knew by heart. But drills assumed height. They assumed margin. He had neither. The canopy released and vanished into the slipstream. The aircraft lurched, barely climbing. Another burst of fire struck home. Witnesses below would later describe the moment in fragments. A sudden roll, a body slumping forward, a machine already dying. The aircraft inverted and fell away. He was clear of the cockpit only moments before impact. The parachute deployed, but there was no sky left to work with, no time for silk to fill with air. The ground came up fast. In less than 3 seconds, it was over. Years of survival, hundreds of missions, countless engagements with the enemy. All of it ended not in combat, not over hostile territory, but within sight of friendly lines. The guns fell silent. On the ground, the crews had no way of knowing what they had done. To them, the threat had passed. Another attack prevented. Another decision made correctly under pressure. Only later would the truth surface. Reports conflicted. Some said flak, others said enemy fire. Confusion lingered until investigators traced the trajectory, the timing, the impact angles. The conclusion was unavoidable. The enemy had failed. The system had not. No one was charged. No one was punished. The gunners had followed their orders exactly as written. In war, procedure often mattered more than outcome. Officially, it was labeled what so many such deaths were labeled: a tragic accident. But accidents imply randomness. This was anything but. It was the predictable result of fear, speed, and a system that could not afford to slow down. And it had taken only seconds to erase what years of combat could not. The battlefield did not stop. Aircraft continued to launch. Convoys kept moving. Orders were issued, acknowledged, and executed as if nothing extraordinary had happened. War had no pause button for grief. The first reports were confused. They always were. Some said enemy fire. Others blamed flak from an unknown position. A few believed it had been mechanical failure. Each explanation offered a kind of comfort. Anything was easier than the truth. But the truth does not stay buried for long. Flight paths were reconstructed, firing angles measured, timelines compared. What emerged was not a mystery, but a pattern, a familiar one. Friendly fire, triggered by fear and speed, executed exactly as the system demanded. The official conclusion was brief. No misconduct. No violation of procedure. No fault assigned. The gunners had acted correctly under standing orders. In the logic of war, that was the end of the discussion. Responsibility dissolved into protocol. Tragedy was filed away as inevitability. For the pilots who knew him, that explanation rang hollow. They understood risk. They accepted death in combat. They had lost friends before. But this was different. This was not the enemy proving stronger. This was something breaking inside the structure they trusted. The sky felt less predictable after that. Not because the enemy had improved, but because safety no longer had a clear definition. Friendly lines had failed. Procedures had failed. And no amount of skill could compensate for a system that did not recognize who was inside it. Commanders moved on quickly. The war demanded momentum. Records were updated, scores finalized. His name entered reports and commendations, frozen in ink. The number mattered. It always did. It became a statistic, a line in a ledger. Another example cited quietly when training officers spoke about recognition failures and identification procedures. Lessons learned, they called it. But lessons learned did not bring him back. The system that killed him remained unchanged. It could not afford hesitation. It could not afford nuance. Speed was still valued over certainty. Fear still drove decisions measured in seconds. Which meant the conditions that killed him were not unique. They were repeatable. That was the part no one wanted to say out loud. War does not only reward courage and skill, it also amplifies the consequences of systems pushed beyond their limits. When those systems fail, they do not fail dramatically. They fail efficiently. And efficiency, in war, is unforgiving. He had survived the enemy because he understood how danger behaved. He died because the system no longer behaved predictably. In the end, the enemy never solved him. They never learned how. The war did. Long after the guns fell silent, the war kept its verdict. His record stood. Numbers were finalized. Historians would later debate margins and confirmations, but the conclusion never changed. He remained one of the best to ever fly. The enemy never surpassed him. No opposing pilot solved the problem he represented. On paper, he won. In reality, the war claimed him anyway. That is the part no scoreboard captures. Wars do not only test skill, they test systems. They push procedures into environments they were never designed to survive. And when those systems fail, they do not fail selectively. They fail on whoever happens to be in the wrong place, at the wrong altitude, in the wrong 3 seconds. His death did not expose a villain. There was no single mistake to correct, no individual to blame. Everyone involved followed their training. Every decision made sense in isolation. That is what made it dangerous. A system that cannot pause, cannot question, and cannot recognize its own champions is a system that will eventually destroy them, not out of malice, out of necessity. The enemy never needed to adapt to defeat him. The battlefield adapted instead. And that is the quiet truth beneath the legend. Skill can defeat opponents. Experience can defeat chaos. But no individual, no matter how exceptional, can outfly a system that has decided to fire. This is why wars erase names so easily. Not because the stories aren't remarkable, but because the mechanisms that end them are ordinary, routine, efficient, forgotten as soon as they finish their work. Somewhere beneath white markers and archived reports, the contradiction remains unresolved. A man who mastered the most dangerous skies of his time was undone by the place that was supposed to protect him. The enemy tried for years and failed. The system needed seconds and succeeded. And the war moved on. If this story stayed with you, hit like so more people can see it. Subscribe if you want more true World War II stories that history almost forgot. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from.